Hello, today I am doing my January and February of 2024 reading wrap up. I'm going to try and do this spoiler free, that way if you haven't read any of these books, I'm not going to ruin them for you, just give you like a little peek at what they were about, but I'm going to do a wrap up of everything I read in the last 2 months. Focus. Okay, if you're new here, my name is Rachelle and I clearly love to read. I started really getting into reading again last summer and I just have not stopped yet. A quick little overview, I just wrote everything down, I have my notes. In January, I read 11 books and in February, I read 12. These were really heavy reading months. I would say normally I read between like 8 and 9, but so many like good books came out and I also read a couple of series that really got me sucked in. Stayed up way too late, way too many nights, but I'm very excited. This isn't even all of them. I listened to some of these on Audible, some of them from the library. But with that being said, I'm gonna jump right into it because I don't want this video to be 2 years long. Okay, starting off strong. This year, my first read of the year was Red Rising by Pierce Brown. If you have not heard of this series yet, it is actually a sci-fi series. It is the first sci-fi series that I have ever read. It's like a dystopian sci-fi. The story takes place in the future on the planet of Mars, and we follow the main character, Darrow, who is a lowborn in this futuristic society who's trying to infiltrate the high society called the Golds. So essentially he wants to work his way up to the top. I'm gonna leave it at that. He wants to infiltrate the Gold Society, and it's basically his journey from the beginning being a lowborn red all the way up to a gold. I didn't know what I was gonna think of this series when I jumped into it. The first book, I will say, was my least favorite of this initial trilogy, but I still loved it. It was just my least favorite because it was a little bit more slow. You're getting to understand like the world, and it's a little bit scary at first because there's a lot going on, but ended up really loving this one. I gave this one 4 stars. The second one took me like by surprise. I felt like this book was action the entire time. I loved this one. I gave this one 5 stars. It was so good. And I didn't think it could get any better, but the last book in this initial trilogy is so good as well. I gave this one 5 stars. You definitely need to read this. I was never really like into sci-fi, but I read this in January. I could not stop. I already have the next 3 books. It's like the same series, but it's set 10 years later. I haven't started it yet because I like don't want it to end. It was so good. So I'm looking forward to reading the next part, but this was so good. This series has my heart. The next book I read in January was a nonfiction. It was called The Buy Nothing, Get Everything Plan. And I think I saw this because my friend had put it on her TBR on Goodreads. So I listened to it because I had the Audible book or whatever. It was okay. I didn't love this book. It did make me think more about waste and wanting to be more mindful of what I'm using and not using and sharing with my community. But overall, I felt like it was mostly just a big list of things to do and it wasn't really like a book. I just feel like it could have been better. It did make me rethink a couple things, but overall it wasn't my favorite read. I gave this one 3 stars. I listened to it on Audible, but still 3 stars. The next book I listened to on Audible, but I loved it so much that I had to get the hard copy, and that was Circe by Madeline Miller. This is an adaptation of Greek mythology and I loved this. The audiobook was so good. The main character, Circe, you just get to follow her life basically from the beginning all the way to its conclusion, and the audiobook, I will say the audiobook was incredible. It's definitely like a retelling of her life she's one of the most famous characters from the Odyssey, but it's such a great retelling. There's a lot of really amazing themes in here. One of them is misogyny because the world in this book is really dominated by men, and how she kind of comes into her own in this book. So good. Highly recommend listening to it. I gave this one 4 stars. It was so good. Also in January, I finally finished the second book in the inheritance cycle. The first book in this series is Aragon, which came out when I was in middle school, maybe even a little bit younger. My sister read it and loved it in middle school. It's one of her favorite books, so I had to read it, but I read Aragon in December. So I read Eldest in January, and I liked this one. I will say the author, Christopher Paolini, is a slower writer, meaning like there's a lot of stuff in this book that isn't like action. It's just setting up the story. It's the background. It's a lot of like stuff like that. So it can get tedious at times, but overall the story itself is so good. If you haven't read Eragon, it's about a boy named Eragon who finds a dragon egg in the forest behind his home. And the dragon and her rider Eragon are the last dragon riders left in this world. And it's up to them to save the world, basically. The second book in the series was really, really good. It was more slow, like I said, but I kind of anticipated that having read the first book. So I gave this one 4 stars as well. Next, I read the final book in the Atlas Complex by Olive Blake. I finished the first 2 in this series it must have been in December last year. I have such complicated feelings on this series. I read the first one, the Atlas 6. The story is about a group of 6 magicians who live in this society, and they get recruited to this place where they basically have to prove themselves to be these really powerful magicians. They all have these different powers. I gave every book in this series 3 stars, including this one, because I feel like there is about half of this book that I did not understand. She talks about like physics and all of these things that are so complex and confusing, and sometimes I get lost in it. There's 6 different characters, so there's 6 different point of views you're reading from as well. Sometimes you love the characters and sometimes you want to punch them in the face, and it's probably not what I would typically recommend to anyone, but it's very different than anything I've ever read. I don't know what else to say about that. If you like dark academia just for the vibes and not for the actual plot, you might like this. Another book I listened to in January was called Atomic Habits. It's a nonfiction as well, and it's about basically how to build amazing habits in your life. I really liked this book as well. I don't know why I picked it up, honestly. I didn't pick it up because I was in a phase of life where I really wanted to adopt these new habits, but I kind of just wanted to hear it because I was hearing such amazing things about it. It was one of the most recommended books, I think, in 2023. I really liked it. It's something that I will definitely go back and listen to in the future if I'm trying to develop any type of habits. I gave it 4 stars. It was really well written. I don't typically like self-help type of books, but this one I really did enjoy. If you're looking for something that's more of a self-help, or you're trying to develop some really responsible or better habits, I highly recommend that one. Next, I read a thriller by Karen Slaughter called Pretty Girls. This book was a thriller. Most thrillers do not scare me. This book scared me. There's a lot of trigger warnings in this book. I would look it up before you read it if you're worried about that, because it's pretty intense, but it's so good. It follows the 2 sisters, Claire and Lydia, and when they were younger, their sister, I think it was their little sister, was murdered when they were younger, and then they grew apart as adults. And then in present time, the sister Claire, her husband is murdered. So it's kind of like, what is going on? Are these connected? It's following that story. It's so incredibly well written. Thrillers are usually something that I kind of like, it's not scary, but it's fun. This freaked me out, but in like the best way. I gave this 5 stars. I thought it was so good. I definitely want to read more of Karen Slaughter. Of course, in January, I read House of Flame and Shadow. I don't even know how to give a recap of this book because there is so much you have to know to give a recap of this book. It's the 3rd in the Crescent City series by Sarah J. Maas. I think a lot of people had really different expectations for this book than I did. So some people were disappointed because they thought there was going to be this huge like crossover between one of her other series, ACOTAR, and this book, and I didn't really feel that way. I went into it thinking this is a Crescent City book, not an ACOTAR book, so I didn't expect a huge crossover, and I would say that that was probably accurate. I still loved this book. I thought it was so good. She's one of my favorite authors. I would probably like anything she writes ever. I loved the story. I loved the characters. I loved the secondary characters, I think, even more than the main characters in this book. I don't know how to give a recap on this book. Unless you have read her other books, then comment down below. We can talk about this. Either way though, you need to read Sarah J. Maas if you have not. My last read of January, I rented from the library, so I don't have the physical copy of it, and it was Kingdom of the Wicked. Terry Maniscalco, hopefully I'm saying that right. Kingdom of the Wicked. It is also a trilogy. I read through this book really quickly. I gave the first one that I read in January 3.5 stars. I feel like it was just okay. It wasn't something that I was excited necessarily to get back into, but it was like, okay, let's see where the story goes. It is about the main character, Amelia, who is a witch, and her twin sister is murdered. And so she's trying to find out what happened to her twin sister. And so she has to kind of go into finding, this sounds crazy, this prince of hell who's supposed to help her find out what happened to her sister. So she summons him to kind of help her, and then it's kind of takes off from there. It was just okay. It wasn't bad. It was just okay, but we'll pick that up in February. Moving on. Trying not to get too long in this. Okay, first things first. I finished the Inheritance Cycle. The third book in the Inheritance Cycle from Aragon is Brissinger. Gosh, I'm hoping I'm saying all of these right. And then the fourth one is Inheritance. I really enjoyed both of these. I will say Brissinger also, I gave 4 stars because it was a little bit slower, but it picked up more than Eldest, and I still ended up loving this one. And then Inheritance, I gave 5 stars. I really liked it. I feel like this one was action the whole way through. I loved the story. I didn't love the ending, but it was still really good. I'm not gonna go into more than that since I already kind of did with Eldest, but loved those 2 books. And then I finished the Kingdom of the Wicked series in February. So Kingdom of the Cursed and Kingdom of the Feared are also I got from the library. And I'll just say that I'm glad that I rented those from the library. I did not love that series, which I was surprised because it came so well recommended. The third book was my least favorite of all of them as well. I might be alone in that, but I just didn't love it. But I felt like I had to finish the series. I think I gave Kingdom of the Cursed 3 stars, and then I gave Kingdom of the Feared 2 because it just wasn't for me. That's all I know how to say. The writing just, it wasn't for me. I do have one that she also wrote called Throne of the Fallen that Justin got me, I think, for Christmas. So I'll read that one because I think it's in the same world, but I'm hoping that it's a little bit different than Kingdom of the Feared. I also read Tomorrow and Tomorrow and Tomorrow by Gabrielle Zevin. I really liked this book. I didn't know if I was going to. My sister was not a huge fan of it. This one follows 2 like video game designers that have known each other since childhood all the way through adulthood. The reason I liked this book so much was it was just such a beautiful view on platonic relationships, and it was just a beautiful story of how these 2 best friends that grew up together like ended up in the end. Overall, I really enjoyed this book. I gave it 4 stars. I think I could have liked it a little bit more. I'm not sure if I will like remember this one for the rest of my life, but I think it's a beautiful story. If you're looking for something that's like heartfelt, I really did like this. There's again some hard parts in it, but it's really good. For my in-person book club in January and February, I finished both of them in February. The first one we read was Everything Sad is Untrue by Daniel Nayeri. It was really good. It was like a memoir, but it was written from his perspective when he was a child as a refugee from Iran. And I really enjoyed it. I think I kind of misunderstood his like sense of humor at the beginning because I didn't understand if he was joking or not for a while. And then as I listened to it more and more, I'm like, okay, he's just hilarious. And I really enjoyed his, so I gave that one 4 stars. And then we also read The Women by Kristen Hanna for book club, and I loved this one. I gave this one 5 stars, which I'm not surprised because I gave The Nightingale by Kristen Hanna 5 stars as well. This is a historical fiction following the main character as she goes through the Vietnam War as a nurse, like a combat nurse, and her experience coming back to America and how hard that was for her. And I don't know, a lot of people I heard didn't love this one because they said that the main character wasn't likable. I disagree. I just feel like she was very real. Like she made a lot of mistakes in this book. I feel like that made her more realistic. So I loved this book. I cried, I laughed. It was really, really good. I just love Kristen Hanna. Next, I read Feybound. This is by Sarah L. Arifi. This book was really recommended. I didn't like it as much as I had hoped yet again. I'm not sure why. I think I just didn't connect with the characters that much. Maybe I would have, I don't know, maybe other people connected with the characters more in this book than I did. I think I'll continue reading the series. This will be an ongoing series. I don't know if it's gonna be 2 books or 3. So I'm curious to see like the conclusion to the story, but I didn't fall in love with the characters. I didn't feel like they were super connecting. It was okay. I gave it 3 stars. I didn't love it, but I didn't dislike it. Okay, next I read Gentle and Lowly, The Heart of Christ for Sinners and Sufferers by Dane Ortland. My friend gave this to me as a birthday gift in January, and I started it in February, and this was one of the best like books I've ever read. I understood everything he was saying. His theology was really sound. It was just so good. If you guys were looking for like a devotional, it's not like a devotional, but I kind of read it as a devotional. I would read 1 or 2 or 3 chapters every morning. I got through it in about a week. It's only like 200 pages. Love this one, 5 stars. Okay, next one is When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker. This book came very recommended on Book Talk, so I grabbed it. It is also a fantasy novel. It follows the main character, Rave, who is like an assassin, and she gets this job to like kill this bounty hunter, but she ends up getting captured and then whisked away by a different king to a different place, obviously. And this new king is actually like a good guy, and so he's taking her back to his his kingdom for his own reasons that he will not explain type of thing. It's very much fantasy and dragons. I'll read anything with dragons. There's tons of dragons in this one. It's really good. I just feel like I won't remember it for the rest of my life. Like, it wasn't one of those books that is going to sit with me like some of these other ones have. So I gave this one 4 stars because I definitely enjoyed it. I will definitely continue the series when more books come out, but it wasn't like the most memorable thing for me. For our Instagram book club in February, we read All the Dangerous Things. I liked this one, but I felt like it was really predictable. It's a thriller as well. It follows like a mom whose son has gone missing, and it's like a year after his disappearance. She's still trying to find answers to what happened to her son. So she's going on talk shows, she's doing all of these things to try and get attention to her son's case, and it's kind of like the wrap up of what ends up happening. I read one of Stacey Willingham's other books, and I felt like that one had a very predictable, like I kind of figured out what was going on about this far into the book, and I would say the same thing happened maybe like 30 to 40% in this book as well. I still enjoyed it. I still read the whole thing. I do really like her writing. I just feel like she could have a bigger like boom at the end. You know what I mean? Like something that's gonna shock you, kind of like Pretty Girls. I really enjoyed it, but I gave it 3 stars because I kind of felt like I knew what was happening the entire time. The last book that I read in February was Bride by Ali Hazelwood. This is my first Ali Hazelwood book that I've ever read. She normally writes contemporary romance, and I believe that this was her first like book with her foot in the door to fantasy. It's about a I laugh when I try to explain this. It was about like a vampire and a werewolf in this like arranged marriage to kind of unite their people, because there's lots of things happening in the area that they live in. There's werewolves, vampires, and humans, and this marriage is going to unite them and bring them together somehow. I loved her writing, I will say. Like, the chemistry between the characters was amazing. The humor, I was laughing out loud like multiple times. It was very funny. I could very well do without the last chapter of the book. Then other than that, I enjoyed it. I think I gave it 3.5 or 4 stars. It was really fun. It made me want to read a couple of her other books because I really liked her writing and it cracked me up, but there were some parts in that last chapter that I could have well done without reading. Anyways, that is it. That is my reading wrap up for January and February. That was a lot of books, and I hope you enjoyed this. Let me know if you have any questions or if you want to talk about any of these books in the comments down below. I would be more than happy to. I hope that this video did not drag on for 1,000 years, and I will talk to you again soon.